Good morning. Appreciate everyone joining our webinar this morning. We're going to give it just a few more minutes for some others to get a chance to get joined in and get connected before we dive into our content for the day. Yeah, it looks like we still got some people that are just getting joined. So again, for those of you that are on, appreciate you jumping in early. We're going to wait just another minute or two for anyone else that's looking to join, because I know we've got some other people signed up that haven't joined just yet. Okay. Hello, Tammy. Nice to have you on the meeting today. All right, we are going to go ahead and dive in and get started on today's webinar. Appreciate everyone joining. If anyone has any questions or thoughts, feel free to put those in the chat, and we can circle back and answer those for you either at the end of the session, or we can do a follow-up with you individually after the session if you've got any further questions on what we're going to cover today. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll dive into the webinar. We're going to be talking through the inventory routines and utilities that are available in GP. So we're going to talk through the routines, what they do, when should you run them, and then the utilities, what they do and when you should run those as well. Kind of talk a little bit about the differences between routines versus utilities, and then dive into some of those specific ones to kind of cover what they're intended to do for you. So I'm Landon Morris. This is a bit of a dated picture, but it's the best I got. I am the Consulting Escalations Manager. I've been with Implementation Specialists for about 2.5 years, and I've been working in the GP ecosystem for over a decade at this point, both as an in-house administrator and now as a consultant, getting to work with a lot of you. So let's talk through the inventory routines. So the options you've got under that routine section are going to be year-end close and the item ABC analysis. There's also that checklists option you'll see there. That's really more just a follow-up internally for yourself, for you to have the ability to say, here's when I have done these different things, here's who's responsible for doing them, here's when they were last done. So it's not, and that checklist is available in other modules as well, purchasing and sales and financial. It is not itself a routine, so I'm not going to dive into it today. However, it's there as a way for you to keep track of when did we last do an ABC analysis on our items. So, if you want to start planning those on a regular basis, that'll help you kind of keep track of that. So you're not having to just put it on a calendar or a spreadsheet somewhere. It can actually be tracked within GP. So the year-end close process, it moves your current year summary data on your inventory as far as what was purchased, what was sold. It moves that into the history tables. So that's obviously something you're going to run as part of year end. There's also the option there for you to remove any unused records and update the costs on your items. And then on the ABC analysis, that is a routine that can be used to analyze your items based on various criteria, and then update that ABC code, which is in the item master options window, to track it as an A, a B, or a C item. So let's talk through a little bit more in detail on each of those routines. The year-end close, again, it moves your current year summary information into the history tables. So that's important to keep those tables up to date. In the database itself, there's going to be separate tables that can be used to look at your current year versus any historical years. When you run that routine, which should definitely be run at year end and really not at any other point, you also have the option, should you choose, to check that box to say that you want to remove any discontinued items. Now that's going to exclude any items that are part of either a kit or some type of bill of material if you're using the manufacturing module in GP. But if you've got any items that have been set as an item type of discontinued, which suggests that you may still have some in stock, but they are not something that you're actively ordering any more of, nor are you actively looking to sell those items. If those are down to quantities of 0, you can say that you want to remove those, and it'll just take them out of your system for you so that you can keep that inventory list clean and accurate. You also have the option to remove any sold lot attributes. So if you're tracking any of your items by lot, you can put attributes on some of those lots to indicate, the manufacturer date or whatever attributes you want to have. If you've got any of those attributes still in the system for lots that have been fully depleted, you can remove those so that, again, you're just keeping your system clean and up to date. There's also the option to remove any sold receipts and cost change history prior to some certain date. That will clean up those tables in history so that you can start recalculating your items, cost and quantities, let's say only based off of the last 3 years. So if you're like some of our customers who have been using GP for 10, 15, 20 years, you may not want to consider what the cost of that item was 20 years ago when it comes to calculating what the cost of that item should be today. You may say, really, we should just be looking at the last 3 years worth of that history when it comes to tracking the quantities of the items, keeping track of how much has been purchased versus how much has been sold, and therefore what the difference left over should be. And then also the cost of those items. Again, trying to factor in, well, its cost some number of years ago used to be $1. Well, that might not be relevant if that's now a $10 part. Just keep in mind, if you do check that box, it does remove those records from those history tables. So if you think you may want to, at some point, still be able to reference any of that, our team can help make sure you've got some type of a backup of that data, just in case you want to go back and look at it again. Oh, sorry. And then the last option up there, if you want, is to update the item's standard cost. So that'll be based off of what the system looks in and sees as your purchase history on that item, which, if you've chosen the last one option we were talking about, you may be kind of truncating in the system how far back you're tracking the purchasing history of that item. So if you had tracked it for the last 10 years, but now you're only keeping the last 3 years, it'll reevaluate what the average cost has been for that item and update the standard cost field on the item based off of the purchasing history that you've chosen to keep, and then also the valuation method that you have on each individual item, whether you're using that FIFO method, perpetual or average. Each item can be set up different. So the system will just recalculate that for you if that's something you want. And again, this is, as it states, a year-end routine that should be done as part of your year-end close. All right, the next routine that you have is really optional for you as to how often, if at all, you want to run this. And this is where we talked about updating the ABC code that you have assigned to each item. Now, there are only really 4 options in the system: A, B, C, or none. But you can use those ABC codes based off of however your organization wants to track your most important, most valuable, most used, whatever criteria you want. You can use that criteria to assign those items as A, and then move next down the list to the items that you want to be assigned as your B items, and then your C's. And then you can use that ABC code option that says none. Those can represent items that are, let's say, D or less, your least important items in the system. And that can really help you a lot in terms of some of your reporting, in terms of how you go about counting those items. When you do your stock counts, if you're using stock counts in the system, you can have recurring stock counts just for A items. And that way, you can count those, hopefully, handful of items that you've indicated are your A's, your absolute most important items. You could count those on a more recurring basis than what you would count your B's and or your C's, or the items that are marked as none. When you're going through that ABC analysis wizard in the system, there are several options, entirely too many options for us to try covering all of them today. But if you've never been in there before, I would encourage you to get in your test company, if you've got one in GP, and just go through this ABC analysis wizard to see the different options that you have on how you can have GP analyze your items and then update all of them based off the criteria you tell it to use to say, this is how I define an A item or a B item or a C item. I will say there are some of our customers that have some additional criteria that they would want put in place that GP doesn't allow. I've worked with those customers to build some custom processes to assign those A, B, C, or none codes in the system. So keep that in mind as well. If you go through that ABC analysis process and you come to the end and go, this really isn't doing everything I need it to do for our business's purposes to track these items as A, B, or C. If you want something special, we're happy to help. So those cover the 2 routines. Routines being something that you likely should plan on running on somewhat of a recurring basis. For sure, the year-end process, obvious enough. The ABC analysis, some of our customers do that quarterly. Some of them do it just once a year. It's entirely up to you. If you've already got these ABC analyses set up, you can go and run through them pretty quickly. And depending on the number of items you have in the system, you can get those updated pretty quick. And all of a sudden you have reassigned that ABC code accordingly, and then you can go rerun your stock counts for just your A items or whatever it is that you want to do now that you've got those set up. Next on our webinar today, we're going to talk through the utilities that are set up in the system for inventory. Utilities are something that don't necessarily need to be run on any kind of a recurring basis. Perhaps they never need to be ran at all. Some of you might have never touched some of these utilities. You might not ever need to, but they are in there just in case you need to use them. So some of the utilities we're going to talk through are the reconcile. That corrects the inventory on hand quantities for your items. There's an option for you to update your costs, where you can update or correct what are commonly referred to as the cost layers for the receipts of your items. Let's say you've got an item that's received at $10, but someone mistyped that. It should have been $100. You could go correct that so that the system doesn't think that you purchased this $100 part at just a cost of $10, because that could seriously throw off your inventory. It could also throw off your cost analysis for that item going forward, where it tries to average that cost, if that's the option you have set up, based off of the last 5 times you've bought it, it was $100, but then this one time you bought it, now it was $10. That average is going to be very inaccurate. So you can go in and correct those if ever it was purchased at the wrong cost. You've got the options to change your valuation or your decimal places. You can update or correct the setup on any item. So if you have an item that was set up with the wrong valuation method, or if you want to increase the decimal places on an item, maybe you had previously been tracking that item with whole numbers. You purchase 1 or 2 or 3 at a time, but you decide that actually is an item that we can purchase or sell in partial increments, halves, or even quarters. You can update the decimal places available on that, so you can start purchasing or selling 1.5 or 1.25 of that item. You've got options for resource planning and purchase order updates, so you can just bulk update who it is that's in charge of being the buyer for certain items, or if you're using the purchase order generator module within GP's purchasing setup, you can bulk update how those items are set to be purchased. You've got your price list utilities. So for those of you that are using GP to sell items at different price levels based off of, let's say, customers that are, industrial level customers versus commercial versus residential, or maybe you've got customers set up with different price levels based off whether the customer is considered an A, a B, or a C customer. And you can say this part gets sold at different price levels depending on whether it's an A customer who might only have a 10% markup because they buy in such volume, a B customer who has a 20, or a C customer who rarely buys from you, maybe they get a 30% markup. You can set up different price utilities in the system, or price lists in the system, assign those price lists to your items, and then have it set to automatically know, here's how much we need to sell these items for based off of this customer who's an A or a B or a C. And then there are a ton of these remove options where you can just remove history from the system if you no longer need to track it, based off of transactions, distributions, period history, stock counts that you've done. So there's a lot of those in the system that you can go through. Let's dive into some of these utilities a little bit more in depth. So reconcile, very common one, very popular. This will correct your inventory on-hand quantities. So we all know no system is perfect. GP is not exempt from that. There are times where you might purchase some quantity of an item, or sell some quantity of an item, or transfer, or do an inventory adjustment transaction, and something might go sideways during the posting of that process, and your quantities are off. So when you look at the transactions, let's just keep it simple and go, you purchased 10 of an item, you sold 5, you should have a balance of 5 left on hand, right? Easy enough. Plus 10, minus 5, 5 left over. But for whatever reason, you look in the system and it says you have 6 on hand. You go, that can't possibly be the case. So an inventory reconcile can be used to correct that. Or it can go back through, look at those transactions and say, if you purchased 10 and sold 5, 10 minus 5 is 5, so that's how much you have left on hand. There's 2 modules for the reconcile. There's the out-of-box GP reconcile. I like that one because it allows you to focus on specific item ranges, which of course can be used to run from and to the same item number. Sorry about that. from and to the same item number. So that's really helpful if you just need to reconcile one item. It's much faster, much faster to do it on just one item. If you need to run it wide open, it is advised to use the pistol option or professional service tools library to use that. Now, the only disadvantage there is that one doesn't let you run it on individual items. It is just every sales inventory item in your system that it's going to run through and reconcile. However, it is considerably faster to run that one on all items than it is to run the GP version on all items. So typically that's how I'll choose between these. Am I running it wide open on everything, or do I just need to run it on some certain item? If so, the GP version is going to be my go-to because I can focus on just item X. All right, adjust costs. So we were talking about this earlier, where perhaps you've purchased some item in the past at different costs and you need to correct those. So here's an example where I purchased this item at $1.78. Again, $1.78, and then a transaction down here for $19.75, and we go, whoa, that seems terribly off. How did it go from roughly $2 to roughly $20? I think somebody might have miskeyed that dollar amount. And so you can come in here and update either the quantities or the costs in your history for that item to properly keep track of those, so that when it comes time to reevaluate and average out what that item's cost should be, the standard cost for the item, you can accurately reflect that. Okay, changing the valuation or decimal places on an item. So you can assign some new evaluation method to items. You would select which option you want to use, and then assign, filter down to just certain items based off the item number, description, generic description, and or class, any combination of those. Hit process, and it'll update those items to that new valuation method. And then on the decimals, you can actually update two different decimals. One is the decimal places for which you track the quantity of an item. So that's where I said before, perhaps there's an item that historically you'd only purchased and sold in whole increments. You now said, actually, that can be sold or purchased in quarter increments. So we want to change the decimal places from 0 to 2. You can also do that on the currency. So there's an item where you need to be able to track the dollars on that item outside of that standard, let's say 2 decimal currency amount. You could say, I want to change the currencies on that item from 2 to 3 or all the way up to 5, and then process that to update all the items that you have selected based off of the filters you've applied for item number, description, generic description, and class ID. Resource planning and purchase order updates. So resource planning is where you can update who the buyer is or who the planner is for your items. If you're using those to track in your system, I know some of our customers do use those to be able to see who's responsible for tracking, or for buying these and make sure we've planned out how much of this item is in the system. So if someone changes, there's personnel changes within your organization, someone leaves or moves to a new role or what have you, you can use this to quickly update and say everything that was Johnny is now Susie. And then on the purchase order item math update, if you're using PO Generator, which if you're not, I would highly suggest looking into that. I think that's a great tool. You can update the settings in the system for how these items get mass purchased. Again, apply your filters for item numbers, sites, classes, generic descriptions. Those are what you've got to work with here. And then say, I want to assign these new values to all of the items that fit those criteria. To either change how you want to plan on reordering it, or what vendor you should use when you purchase those items, what have you. So there's several options there that you can then bulk assign, and that way when you run that PO generator, it uses those new settings for all of those items. All right, the price list utility. This is where we talked before about if you've got customers that get sold the same item at different prices, depending on whether that customer is a regular buyer who buys in a lot of volume, or someone who hardly ever purchases from you at all and might not get that same kind of discount. You can create new price lists. So if you've got a new price level that you set up, maybe you had A, B, and C customers, and you said, you know what, we really need a new level of like A+ customers, and those are our absolute top tier platinum level customers. And so you create a new price level for those. You can assign that price level to all of the items that you plan on selling to that platinum level customer. You can say these items are now available to be sold at the A+ level, which means they only get a 2% markup as opposed to the standard 10% or whatever. You can also update those different settings. If you've already got some price levels set up for items, you can change those to go, we're no longer doing a 10% markup on our A customers. We've said we're only going to do an 8% markup. So anything that gets sold at the A price level should go from a 10 to an 8% markup. And you've got options to sell those items either at some set currency amount, or you can do a percentage of list price if you're tracking that, or you can sell it at a markup or a set margin expectation on either the standard or the current cost. So that's a nice option too, so that as cost on the item changes, how much you as a business have to pay for the item, you can make sure that you're always applying a markup on that of some amount, so that as the cost fluctuates, so does your selling price to your customer. All right, and then finally, we've got all of those remove history options, transaction history, distributions, period history, journal history, stock count, assemblies, if you're using any of that, bin transfers, and then if you're using in-transit transfers, where you can track that an item moved from site A to site B, but it moved there via, let's say, a truck. So if you've got service technicians or something that are traveling from one site to another, you can use that in transit to tell you, how did it get from site A to site B? Oh, well, technician Landon drove it in his truck, which is also set up as an inventory site in your system. So you can use that to just clear out those histories and go, we no longer need to track. It moved from A to B, and we no longer need to keep that history to show how it got there. So a lot of these in the system for sure. Before you remove anything, definitely check with the right parties within your organization and check with our team as well. We can talk through what those repercussions might look like. Make sure that you're not going to accidentally remove anything that you may decide later, oh no, we still needed that. Because once it's gone, it's gone. Again, our team can help you determine if that's the right move. We can also help make some backups of that data in case you decided, we may still want to reference it in some other way, but within the main system of GP, we don't need to keep that history for this item from 20 years ago. It's just not relevant to us anymore. It's taking up space and it's making it harder to find those transactions. So you got 20 years worth of data to sift through. So, work with our team for sure, and we can decide if that's the right move for you. And if you do follow through with these, you can clear up a lot of those transactions so that your system is leaner and therefore faster, and it's easier for you to find the transactions that are relevant for you. Okay, so that covers what we've got today. If anyone has any thoughts or questions, again, feel free to put those in the chat that we've got going here. If you've got any comments outside of this, feel free to email us. You can contact our consulting support at iscorp.biz. Our team will see that. We'll get someone to respond. Sales at iscorp.biz if you've got any sales related questions. Let's see, I'm trying to see. We've got some questions in here. Adjust costs, how far back does it correct? You can go back as far as you need to, as far as you have history for. Reconcile screen, need clarification. So on the reconciliation, the reconcile screen, let me go back to that one real quick. So on reconcile, what this will do is go through and make sure that the quantities that you show on hand add up to the differences between what you've purchased, what you've brought in, versus what you sold or transferred, what should have gone out. And obviously the system should properly reflect what the remaining balance is. Sometimes it doesn't, and so a reconcile is a great way to go through and try to fix that. And my apologies, I'm having a hard time scrolling through some of these questions that we've got in here. They're very small on my screen, so I can only see a few words at a time. Something has been posted. Will it change the history? You can change the cost layer history. It won't change how much of that has hit the GL. That is something you'd have to do a separate like journal entry for. But as far as just strictly on the inventory side, you can correct that if you purchased an item at the wrong cost. You can go back and correct that. Reconciles everything. Yes, if you use the PSTL version, there's no option to filter. It's going to be all of your inventory items in the system. If you use the one that's in GP under the inventory module, you can filter to just individual items if you want. Yes, so Jennifer, good point. If someone receives in, some item that should be 10 gallons at $100 each, instead they received 10 cases at $100 each. Yeah, it'll allow you to go back and go, hey, let's go correct that. Now again, that doesn't correct what hit the GL, let's say for that purchasing receipt, but it will allow you to correct on the inventory side so that the next time you reevaluate the cost, the standard cost of that item, it can take that into account and go, yeah, we ordered this in a case, not per gallon. So, we should correct what the cost of each of that should have been. I think that covered everything. Okay. So we are at end of today. I very much appreciate everyone joining. Again, if you've got any follow-up questions, you can shoot those over to our team. Support@iscorp.biz is going to be your best method for getting a hold of us, and we will answer whatever questions you got for us. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming today, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.